The very first book that I wrote was called Burn Your Goals, because I was so tired of people sending me their goals. And I finally responded to a girl that actually played golf at Oregon. She sent me all her goals. She was incredibly good at golf. She had the potential of hitting all of these goals. But I just text her back and I go, I want you to burn that. I said, I'm not interested in your wish list. I'm interested in what are you willing to sacrifice and what are you willing to commit to doing every single day inside of your 86,400 seconds to close the gap between who you are and who you want to be.
Mr. Medcalf, well, thank you for saying yes to me then on the backside of that. I've thoroughly enjoyed reading your books. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to people who have played golf with you around the Southern California area. I think there's a lot that we can learn both on and off the golf course. There's many places that we could start because you have a fascinating journey and there's a lot of wisdom wrapped up in your books. But one thing that has stuck with me throughout studying your material is this importance that you write of keeping a scorecard for life. And so I would like to start with if you could explain what is the scorecard for life and what is on your personal scorecard.
Yeah, great question. And thank you so much for having me. I love what you guys do. And so it's an honor to get to be here today. So the scorecard for life it's being really intentional about choosing what we're measuring and what we're actually trying to grade ourselves on, instead of just going by what society says that you should be focused on. If we just focus on, our golf scorecard, that's probably going to leave us pretty unfulfilled, and it's going to ultimately make us kind of miserable to be around at times, and ultimately not put first things first. So C.S. Lewis said, if we put first things first, secondary things aren't suppressed, they increase. But we live in a society that is constantly pushing us and pulling us towards putting secondary things first, like our golf score, like how much money we have in our bank account, the status of our job, or how, beautiful our significant other is, things like that, winning, losing championships. And I just believe, I had a very traumatic, kind of crazy childhood. My baby brother drowned whenever I was 9. I was the one that pulled him out of the pool. I lost 2 coaches to prison when I was 14 and 16. And my dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer when I was 21. And so a lot of what I believe in and teach is kind of this living life through a death lens kind of idea or philosophy. And what's going to matter on your deathbed. So when my dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer, I saw it radically change what he cared about, what he thought was important on both ends. Stuff that was really important all of a sudden wasn't important anymore, and stuff that hadn't been important all of a sudden was really important. And so that new scorecard is really about, okay, what do I want to be remembered for whenever I'm gone? What characteristics do I look at in people that I really admire? And instead of focusing, like I said, on some arbitrary outcome-based goal, whether it be on the golf course or winning a championship or getting a new job or pay raise, what if I just focus on these 3 characteristics and I'm going to grade myself on that every single day? Something that's controllable, and then really using that as a filter for how we go through life. So I had the privilege of coaching a guy that founded a $1 billion company, and he actually said that this exercise was the most beneficial exercise of everything that we ever did together. And so basically you think about the characteristics that you believe will help you live a truly successful life from a deathbed perspective. And then you put that on a little card, and it's great if you can laminate it and put it in your wallet. But then once or twice a day, grade yourself on how you did on those things. And I don't tell people what to put on their new scorecard. It's what characteristics do you believe are going to be most important for you to live a truly successful life from a deathbed perspective. So, some of the ones that I have had over the years on mine are living a bold and courageous life, patience, empathy, and then, being deeply present. Those are kind of the 4 things that I feel like I've really tried to grade myself on a daily basis. And again, I think for everybody that's different. For different people, they're going to need different things based off of their wiring. I'm great at climbing mountains. I'm great at achieving things. But what I've had to realize is, okay, well, sometimes in that process of grinding and competing and, I'm kind of wired like Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods, I would sacrifice and I would harm relationships that were really important to me. And so I've had to go, you know what? I'm wired this way, so I don't really need to worry too much about competing. I need to focus more on like surrendering the outcome, which ultimately I believe was one of the reasons why I was able to win the club championship. Is I wasn't focused on that. I was really focused on surrendering it and just being deeply present, shot by shot. And even sometimes I would look at my caddy and go, I lost this hole. Mm-hmm. And that just would free me up to then allow my training and things to come through, instead of really trying to, squeeze that thing. And then it's like trying to squeeze water. Oftentimes it's just going to, dissipate in your hands. So yeah, that's kind of the idea behind the new scorecard.
I find it that, there's a wonderful sort of like contradiction between, some of the things that you write about, some of the techniques that you want us to employ here on the path to mastery or greatness or whatever you're chasing, and oftentimes it's doing the little things correct, right? So yeah. I've tried this writing through this scorecard for life practice, and I almost feel like it's like the little spinning top from Inception, because if you drill down into the little all the time, I think it's at least for me personally, it's difficult to get lost in the sort of the chaos of life, the nitty gritty, the secondary things that you're talking about, and pulling yourself back into a big picture, as you call it, a deathbed state, that really long lens, like, hey, this is the end of the road here, how are we doing here, is kind of a little maybe antidote to the anxiety of the day-to-day.
Well, I just feel like I see people, and I've seen it in my personal life, but I've seen it in lots of people that I've studied as well. In Chop Wood, Carry Water, I talk about the oh shit ladder, that a lot of people, they just climb the ladder and they 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 climb the ladder, and they get to the top of the building, top of the ladder, into their life, and they go, oh shit, my ladder was on the wrong building. And so, oftentimes we think, man, if I could just get there, if this would just happen, if this circumstance would change. But honestly, most of the time, one of my favorite books is The Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks. And in there, he talks about the difference between a transformation of being and a transformation of circumstance. And when we have a transformation of being, then a lot of the circumstances don't really matter, because we've become the person that can handle whatever comes at us, whether that feels good in the moment or feels terrible in the moment. If you really focus on the character, if you really focus on developing the skills, if you really focus on what is going to matter on your deathbed, it's going to allow us to live a way more significant, fulfilled, content, joyful life. If we constantly are focused on everything that we don't have, if we're constantly focused on, again, these arbitrary outcome-based goals, we'll sacrifice what truly matters in the pursuit of something that probably isn't really going to matter on our deathbed. In the moment, it feels really important. Growing up, certain games that I would play in felt so big and so important that, like, almost life or death if I won or lost this game or this championship. And then as you get space from that and time goes on, you look back and you're like, oh my goodness, this was so silly.
You don't remember the final score.
Right. Not even do you not remember the final score, and maybe even you remember the final score, but you just go, all I did was just get in my own way by putting this thing on a pedestal that doesn't belong on a pedestal. And then I don't allow my training to come through. I don't allow my skill to come through. And we just become our own worst enemy based off of something that we've blown up in our mind, or we've allowed other people to tell us, oh, this is what's really important. But that's why I love the deathbed exercise of, oftentimes, especially like in groups of, non-kids and non-athletes, one of the first exercises I'll do from stage is I'll have them write out their obituary and just ask them, what do you want to be remembered for whenever you're gone? Okay, it's not usually how much money you made, your significant others, beauty, cool jobs, or how many championships you won. And I've done this, I had the privilege of working with UNC women's soccer and Anson Dorrance. And Anson Dorrance won 21 national championships. Nobody's ever going to win more national championships than he has. And I asked him in front of all the coaches at North Carolina, I said, do you want to be remembered for how many championships you've won when you're gone? Is that what's really going to matter on your deathbed? And he was like, no, absolutely not. Super competitive, loves to win, is as competitive as they come. But at the end of the day, is that what he wants to be remembered for? No.
I've heard the oh shit ladder described to me recently as something called manopause, which is
interesting.
Usually in the context of young men, it's happening quite frequently, I guess. Around 28 to 32, they're climbing ladders, post-college ladders into the real world, and then they get there and they realize this is the wrong mountain, and you have a choice to white knuckle it up the mountain or climb back down and start again. So I definitely love the oh shit ladder, that technique. I do want to talk about soccer, but if I have a question for you, because a lot of what you're writing about is this path to greatness, right? And if it's not, in the case of UNC women's soccer, great competitors, if it's not championships, if it's not winning, if it's not actually greatness or mastery at the end of the thing that matters, I'm wondering, in your opinion, what is the case for going down that path to begin with? Why chase greatness? Why do all the things that are required? If that's not the point at the end of it, what is the point?
Well, so I think mastery kind of is one of the points.
Okay. So maybe we should split up mastery and greatness.
And I think but I think it's how you define greatness. Is greatness some arbitrary based outcome, or is it tapping into your greatest potential? And so that's always been my issue. People love Chop Wood, Carry Water. It's the most famous book that I've written. But the very first book that I wrote was called Burn Your Goals, because I was so tired of people sending me their goals. And I finally responded to a girl that actually played golf at Oregon. She sent me all her goals. She was incredibly good at golf. She had the potential of hitting all of these goals. But I just text her back and I go, I want you to burn that. I said, I'm not interested in your wish list. I'm interested in what are you willing to sacrifice and what are you willing to commit to doing every single day inside of your 86,400 seconds to close the gap between who you are and who you want to be, between where you're at and where you want to be. What are you willing to sacrifice and what are you willing to do? I'm not interested in your wish list. I'm interested in what you're actually willing to sacrifice and what you're actually willing to do. And so, to me, it's making sure that, like, if we're pursuing mastery, if we actually pursue mastery, there's a lot of stuff that is secondary that will not be suppressed. It will increase. So that's the ironic part. John Wooden never talked to his guys about winning, ever. He was just meticulous about the process. And, I got to serve as the director of mental training for UCLA women's basketball for 7 years. I was, inundated with John Wooden's stuff. And he never talked to them about winning. Won more than almost anybody else. But never focused on that. He focused on the details in the process, down to how they put on their socks, how they tie their shoes. And so it's the same thing. Sometimes people get this sense from my books, like, oh, he's soft. No kid I've ever trained would say that I'm soft. The Eric Sheets, who was one of the first kids in the closet of the gym, he called me Dr. Pain, but he was never forced to do anything. He was always asked the question, do you want to get better or do you want to go home? He was never, we never used fitness as a punishment, but we did more fitness than anything else because fitness is the starting point. It is the thing that can close a gap between, talented and non-talented, or highly skilled and lack of skill, quicker than anything. So it's the price of admission. It's not punishment. This is just what we do. And so, there's a guy that I've informally coached for 4 or 5 years. He says, Joshua, you're a combination between Rain Man and Bobby Knight. Like, it's not soft. It's actually a higher standard. So when I tell people to burn their goals and focus on true mental toughness, the way I define true mental toughness is have a great attitude, give your very, very best, treat people really, really well, have unconditional gratitude, regardless of your circumstances. To live that out moment by moment, day by day, is a way higher standard than some arbitrary outcome-based goal. And if you focus on true mental toughness, the stuff that's actually controllable, it gives you a really good opportunity to actually come close to your potential in terms of the outcomes. That's why C.S. Lewis said, if you put first things first, secondary things aren't suppressed, they increase. So it's not lowering the bar for anyone. Pursuing mastery is way harder than winning something, because pursuing mastery never stops. Pursuing greatness never stops. When it's a goal, I achieved the goal, or what happens when the goal's out of reach? That was always the thing when I would go and work with programs like football in particular. So your goal was to win a NCAA title. Okay, well, in football, you lose one game, and sometimes that's off the table. So then what happens to your process? What happens to your pursuit of mastery? What happens to your pursuit of greatness? All of a sudden, your goal's gone. Can't achieve it. And that's the issue with that. Is it's not that I have some issue with goals and goal setting. It's that it's a faulty strategy. Sure. It's not the most beneficial thing to do. If you actually cared about winning more, you would focus on the process. If you actually cared about achieving more of your potential and fulfilling more of your potential, you would focus on this stuff over here, because these are putting first things first. The cool part about it is that you can't lose when you do this, because everybody wants people on their team in sports, in business, in relationships that embody the characteristics of true mental toughness. Most likely, whatever characteristics you came up with for your new scorecard are going to help you be a better father, a better husband, a better employer, a better boss, a better golfer, everything. They apply to everything. The issue is that when we focus over here on these outcomes and these achievements, well, we may or may not achieve these things, but oftentimes we sacrifice the stuff that actually matters in the pursuit of the achievement or the goal. So it's really something that's not the most healthy or beneficial strategy.
And this is where we live a mission-driven life, not a goal-driven. So is the mission the same as the process? Is that the same?
Kind of. I think that coming up with a mission for your life is super important. My mission for my life, for a long time was love people, serve people, provide value. There was nothing that could happen in my life where I couldn't love people, serve people, and provide value. You could, Nelson Mandela, you could be in prison. You could have everything taken away from you. You can still love people, serve people, and provide value. If, you think that you want to do something in medicine, like quote unquote, becoming a doctor. Okay, well, what about just serving the needs of the sick and the dying? Do you have to be a doctor to serve the needs of the sick and the dying? No. And that's the thing, is like, that's what Mother Teresa's mission was, to serve the needs of the sick and the dying. Maybe that means that you end up becoming a doctor or a PA or something like that. But you don't have to get there to start doing the thing and living out that mission. And that's the cool thing about living a mission-driven life, is that it's always at your fingertips. There's a lot of people that can tell you you're not qualified to become a doctor. They can tell you that you're not smart enough, you don't have enough money, you don't have the right background or resume. but nobody can stop you from serving the needs of the sick and the dying. So it's really trying to come up with a mission that's true to your heart. So in the books that I signed for you, I always sign Chop Wood, Carry Water. I hope this story encourages and inspires you to become relentless in the pursuit of what sets your soul on fire. Like, what sets your soul on fire? When I got access to sports psychology at Duke after, getting kicked off the team 5 times in 2.5 years at Vanderbilt and being a quote unquote talented head case, and then seeing this stuff and getting exposed to it and still thinking the guy that taught me was crazy and had never done this stuff at a high level. But then I watched in 2 months where I go from being the last pick on the team to the Duke Student Athlete of the Week, the ACC Player of the Week, finishing second in points to on our team to the very best player in the country, Mike Grella. And I went, why'd I have to get to Duke to learn this? Why wasn't I taught this when I was 6 years old, when I was 8 years old, when I was 10 years old? Like, why isn't this being taught everywhere? And that really set my soul on fire. And so I skip scholarships to law school and I move across the country to live and serve in a homeless shelter. And I live there for 7 months and I voluntarily sleep on Skid Row. And then I go to the closet of a gym and I live in the closet of a gym for 9 months. And I start going into Watts and South Central and training the athletes there for 3 years. And that mission of love people, serve people, provide value. And what do I wish that I would have had? What tools do I wish that I would have had growing up? What do I wish my coaches would have known? What books do I wish they would have had? What apps do I wish they would have had? What kind of mentorship do I wish they would have had in their life? And that really set my soul on fire for a long time. And that was the focus, is how can I create this stuff? How can I be this? How can I give this to people? And again, there's nobody that can stop me. I never got a publishing deal.
Mm-hmm. Probably a wise decision in hindsight.
Today, it was a very wise decision.
Well
but
played.
back then, in the moment, it felt like, why won't somebody give me a publishing deal?
Sure.
And in so many different ways. I didn't get funding for when I created the first mental training apps in the world for basketball, soccer, and golf. Like it was just figuring this stuff out of, okay, what is the smallest version of my dream that I can do right where I'm at, using what I have today. Mm-hmm. Instead of, well, I don't have this, and well, all these other people that grew up with resources and come from these types of families, or they have these types of relationships and connections. No, just what is the smallest version of my dream that I can do right where I'm at, using what I have. And when we're just faithful like that, resources have a bad habit of running towards people that are really faithful.
I like that. So you've referenced the closet that you lived in.
Yeah.
You just gave a little bit of context to your soccer career. Can we jump back there? I want to know what went on at Vanderbilt, how you ended up at Duke, what exactly clicked in your soccer career, because I think it has a lot of parallels, which we'll talk about, to your golf career, and then how you end up in LA doing what you're doing after that.
Yeah, so I played a lot of sports growing up, but I was dirt poor. Whenever I was 6 years old, I was dreaming about Happy Meals. My dad grew up in a trailer park where I had to duct tape his trailer together. Golf was not an option because of the level of, status and socioeconomic level that we were at. First time I touched a golf club was when I was 13 years old at like a $25 golf camp at the, pitch and putt in Broken Arrow. And,
Oklahoma.
Yeah, Broken Arrow, Oklahoma.
Okay. Yep.
And so soccer and basketball were two of the predominant sports that I was playing. And freshman year in high school, I realized, I don't work that hard at soccer, and I'm kind of known at a statewide level and regional level. That's where I need to focus my energy. It's probably going to afford me the best opportunities down the road. So I get a 10% scholarship to play soccer at Vanderbilt. End up there, but again, I was a talented head case. I wasn't exposed to this type of stuff growing up. My parents did the best that they could, but my dad didn't know anything about sports, never played sports. My mom taught me everything about sports, and we just didn't have the resources until much later on, closer to freshman, sophomore year in high school, So when my foundation was being built, it was really just from my mom and dad saying, you know, focus on the basics, master the basics. But that was it. And so I get to Vanderbilt, talented head case, and I'm in so far over my head socially, academically. I had a 21 on my ACT. I had 3 people on my hall that had perfect scores on their ACT. And the only reason why I got into Vanderbilt is because I was really, really good at soccer.
I was going to say, you have to be really good at soccer.
Yes, to have a 21 on your ACT and get into basically an Ivy League school, it was bad. And it took a long time for me to figure that piece out. And so I really, really struggled whenever I was there. It wouldn't be until I was 32 that I found out that I was on the autism spectrum. So socially, I had all these challenges that I didn't really understand. You know, I just knew that all growing up, my middle brother would say to me, you know, at least 5 times a week, why can't you just be normal? And I was like, I don't know. Like I feel like I am being normal, but my normal was very different. And so it took a long time to kind of figure out how to assimilate socially, and that's still a challenge. And so really struggled at Vanderbilt. Like I said, kicked off the team 5 times in 2.5 years for a variety of different reasons. And then they cut our program after my junior year. So we came back from Christmas break junior year, and we found out there's no longer men's soccer. And so I hang up my cleats. I'm going to focus on my education, because at that point, you know, my dad had grown up in a trailer park, and his firstborn son went to a school like Vanderbilt. It's a really big deal to him, and we had a really bad relationship, and that was like the one thing that I had kind of done right and that was good in that relationship. And so I just focused on my education. I end up going out for the Vanderbilt club soccer team about 6-7 months later. They end up cutting me from the team. Then there was a guy on our team at Vanderbilt that transferred to Duke as soon as the program was cut, Joe Germanis. Joe called on my birthday and he said, hey man, are you interested in coming to play soccer at Duke? And I was like, I think a better question is the number 1 team in the country interested in a guy that got kicked off the team 5 times in 2.5 years, who had mediocre statistics, who just got cut from the club team? And he's like, yeah, you know, we have a guy that got injured. There's some scholarship money available, and I vouched for you. And I'm like, okay. And so I had to get my GPA up to a 3.0 and only had 1 semester. And I was at like a 2.87, I think. So basically I had to have a 4.0 that last year. And so I built a lot of relationships with my teachers and worked very hard and let them know what was on the line. But ended up getting a full ride scholarship to play on the number 1 team in the country. But then when I got there, I was the last pick when we play pickup games. So my teammates said, you are the worst of the worst. And then at that time, I was taking this sports psychology class with Dr. Greg Dale. And he asked everybody in the class one day, he said, how much of sports do you guys think are mental? And this class is comprised mainly of Duke student athletes. And people are going around the room and they're like, 70%, 80%, 90%. I remember one girl was like, Greg, I think that sports are 100% mental. And I'm just sitting there like the logic side of my brain going, if sports are over 70% mental, then why has nobody taught us how to train mentally? Why do we spend 100% of our time on physical training? And again, if it wasn't for being the last pick on the team, I would have just blown it off and been like, this is just hokey pokey stuff. But because of the position that I was in, I said, you know what, I'm going to attempt to do what this guy's talking about. And I saw in that very short period of time, I had this transformational experience. And then that's when I got really mad. And I was like, why'd I have to get here to learn this? And I, really just made it my mission to, how do I get this stuff to the masses? And Greg Dale got mad at me for years because I wouldn't go and get my sports psychology degree. And I was like, I don't need a degree to do this. I'm going to share my story, and I'm going to study and read. And like, I'm in medical school. And I did that for about 4 years, where I would read for 10 to 12 hours a day. Nobody was telling me what to read. Nobody was telling me what to do. I was just immersing myself and trying to find everything that made sense, and then test it with myself and test it with people that I had the opportunity of working with.
And so you from there you go to California. You go live in a closet.
Well, first I skip scholarships to law school. I don't write my master's thesis, and I move into a homeless shelter called the Dream Center, downtown Los Angeles in Echo Park. And I live and serve there for 7 months.
And you say you write about a day that everything changed for you there. That clicked.
That was then in the closet of the gym. So went from the Dream Center to the closet of the gym, and I was the sports director for a local church.
Okay.
And they had this huge gym that wasn't being used. It had a really big closet, but literally we rolled out trash cans and rolled up the carpet and cleaned it up, but like it was a full-on closet. It wasn't made for people to be living in, and I lived there for 9 months.
Was this did this come with the territory, like with this mission? Like, is that just what you could get away with, or was there a part of you during this time it's just like, I have to seek out the uncomfortable? Were you looking for pain almost on this journey?
I think that it's just kind of the way that I'm wired. So like, I remember a time really vividly in the projects when a gunshot went off, and I ran towards the gunshot, and like people had to grab me. Like, I think that there's something innate in the way I'm wired that I do run towards pain. I do run towards hard stuff. I get excited at the challenge. And so I don't know that I fully understood all of the choices that I was making. It just felt like they were the natural thing for me to do. Now looking back, I understand how crazy it looks and how different, or like, but in the moment, people weren't like celebrating, oh man, you started at the bottom and like, this is so cool. Like, no, my friends thought I was crazy. Mm-hmm. For a decade, my friends that went to Vanderbilt and Duke thought that I'd lost my mind. And then I popped up at 32, basically retired, and they were like, whoa, how in the world? And dude, everywhere I go, people, know your book. And I'm like, yeah, I spent a decade, head down, making radically different choices and sacrifices and running towards the stuff that most people run away from.
Was it difficult at times to find that conviction? I mean, I don't know. I felt sad in parts of your book, especially when you're, talking about comments that your coaches might have made and just feeling like a bit different socially. Is there any, if there are people out there that may feel like I am crazy or, I'm just different, what was that like for you to get through that and really convince yourself that, everyone else might be crazy? I kind of know what I'm doing here.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever knew, like, man, I know that I know what I'm doing. I just believed, like I said, I was just being relentless in the pursuit of what set my soul on fire. And I was just being myself. Like, it's funny because I wasn't, I think I rub a lot of people at country clubs the wrong way. Just my presence.
How so?
The way that I dress, the way that I carry myself. I'm pretty sure that somebody on our staff walked by and saw what was going on in here, and the words that came out of his mouth were, oh my God. Like, I know that I drive certain people crazy. I also know that I'm going to be myself, and they have to deal with that. And I know that there's going to be challenges that end up coming with that, but that kind of just is what it is. And it's interesting today being on this side of the equation, and people sometimes think that I carry myself the way that I do because I'm quote unquote successful now. And I'm like, I carried myself like this when I lived in the homeless shelter. I carried myself like this when I lived in the closet of a gym. This is how I've always been. It's just my circumstances have changed. But also, I'm not afraid of my circumstances changing again. Mm-hmm. And so it's, for people that struggle with being different, I think that most of the time we struggle with being different when we allow the thoughts and feelings of other people and what they think of us to be the driving force of our behavior. It bothers me when people think certain things about me. I'm human. I have feelings. I just don't allow what other people think of me to be the driving force in my behavior. And I think that there's freedom in that. I think that if more people would let go of the attachment to what other people think about them and actually authentically be who they are, then I think they would attract more people to themselves that are more genuine, because people want to be around people that are genuine. Like, I can deal with a lot of different types of people. Like, my friends span the spectrum. The one thing I can't deal with are people that are fake. Whatever you are, I can deal with that if that's who you are. But if I sense that you are fake or trying to be something that you're not, I cut those people out of my life pretty quickly. And I found a lot of freedom and deep, real connection with other human beings by being the most authentic version of myself. And like I said, I know that I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but I'm not going to allow what other people think of me to be the driving force in my behavior. And I also, if I study history and I study autobiographies of people that I admire, if you want to change the world, you have to be socially disagreeable. It's the price of admission. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of the same thing, the price of admission for greatness. Like, you're going to have to look crazy. You know, I love Kevin Johnson, an old Phoenix Sun story of how he would spend Friday and Saturday nights when everybody else was out partying in the gym with the janitors working and training and building skill. And his peers thought that he was crazy. People are always going to think that you're crazy when you pursue mastery, when you pursue greatness, whenever you are relentless in the pursuit of what sets your soul on fire, when you're authentically yourself and you don't just do what society says to sit down, shut up, stand in line. That's going to drive people crazy. Mm-hmm. Like, I disrupt things everywhere that I go because I don't just go, oh, this is what they say we're supposed to do, so I'm going to go do this. No, I'm not. I'm not that guy.
Sure.
And again, that's going to cause friction in some places. But I have to also know that's the double-edged sword, that if I want to change the world and the ways that I have and want to continue to, that's the price of admission.
Yeah. It seems to be, well, first of all, I think it's a scary thing to do right now currently. Scarier than ever to be yourself, say what you mean, do what you want, be who you are. It feels that way for me personally, but I also think there seems to be a social sort of transaction that occurs even if you do rub people the wrong way. At least there's, I think, an acknowledgement, whether it be deep down, that, hey, at least that person was themselves. Yeah. I'm not, at least that person wrote the book.
Right.
At least that person said what they wanted to say. At least they wore what they wanted to wear. Mm-hmm. And if I was doing that, I might be at a different place in life.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would like to let's talk about chop wood, carry water. Where does that phrase originate from? What was the process? Where were you at in life when you wrote that?
Great questions. So it's an ancient Eastern phrase. It's been around for a very long time. I first became aware of it in Phil Jackson's book, 11 Rings. Mm-hmm. It was a big mantra of his with his teams that, no matter what's going on around you, we chop wood, carry water. It's not allowing our circumstances to dictate our behavior. It's making a choice beforehand that this is going to be our behavior regardless of our circumstances. And then James Clear, who I believe is the greatest writer of our generation, he did a little thing on a guy that had that tried to become a samurai archer. And so there was a little bit of the inspiration there. Some of the ideas that I talk about in many of my writings come from James Clear and ideas that he writes about. And so then what had happened was I had been traveling and speaking a lot, and I was always compared to this guy, Trevor. I think his last name is Immelman.
But South African.
Okay, sorry, I messed that up. We may need to cut that.
I must have a beautiful golf swing.
I was always compared to this guy named Trevor from IMG Academy. People would always say, "Oh, you sound like Trevor from IMG. You sound like Trevor from IMG." And eventually, Trevor left IMG and went to do his own thing. They hired a guy named Justin Suh, who was on staff now. I think he's with the Red Sox and a couple other professional sports teams. When Justin left, they tried to hire me to head up mental conditioning and leadership. And I said no a couple different times. My mom was like, "Hey, you kind of originally built your organization with IMG Academy in mind. Maybe you should at least go out there and hear them out." So I went out, was very impressed. And
this is the prep school in Florida.
Yes, in Bradenton.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so it's the biggest boarding school for athletes in the world. And so the issue was, if I had taken that job, they would own my work product. And so I knew that nobody had written the go-to book in sports psychology. That was pretty obvious to me. I also knew that if IMG Academy is asking me to head up mental conditioning and leadership, I'm probably one of the people in that space that had the potential to do it. So I went home not knowing whether I was going to take the opportunity or not, and I didn't really leave bed for about 2 months. I would leave bed for maybe 30 minutes a day to get food, use the restroom, sometimes shower, sometimes not, and I just wrote. And the original book was called Start Here, Mental Training Finally Made Simple. It had a 40-page fable inside of it called Chop Wood, Carry Water. John Gordon, who has written a lot of amazing books and been like a big brother to me, he read that original draft and he said, throw out the rest of this. Chop Wood, Carry Water is the book. Expand upon that. That is the ticket. And I was like, man, I don't write fables. I write real books. And he just hounded me for a week or two. And then finally I relented and did exactly what he said. And at the same time, I wrote one of my favorite books called Hustle, which is kind of my memoir that outlined a lot of my journey. And then I also, this thing people sometimes find fascinating, I write all of my books on my phone in notes.
Do you really?
Yeah. I edit on a computer, but I write on my phone.
Why is that?
It just makes the most sense to me in terms of creativity. So Austin Kleon, I can't remember which book it is, but he has a book about creativity and making art. And he's kind of the same way, that he says that he actually thinks that a computer is the least creative tool. And so he has 2 different desks. He has one desk that has like cardboard and construction paper and lots of like physical tools that he uses to create. And then he has his editing desk. And I don't know why, but I feel most creative when writing on my phone. And so, yeah, just in notes on my phone.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I'll try that.
Yeah.
So you write, so Chop Wood, Carry Water, for people that haven't read it, you should go read it. It's sort of, like you said, it's a sports psychology, it's a psychology book, self-help book, housed inside this.
It's a fable of a young boy that wants to become a samurai archer, and it's his 10-year journey to doing that. And basically what I tried to do inside of that is everything, every obstacle, every challenge that I had faced, and every tool that I had really found helpful for me and clients, I tried to incorporate that into the fable. So the way I describe it to people that haven't read it is, it's like a modern day combination of The Alchemist and The Karate Kid. And it's interesting because it is one of, if not the go-to book in sports psychology, but also it gets used in so many different areas and facets of life, from bankers and doctors and lawyers and salespeople, because it really has to do a lot more with life than sport specific. I think From Hack to Scratch is the only book that I've ever really written that is a lot more detail oriented around a specific sport and specific ideas. I usually always saved those for when I would go and work with a specific sports program. I never felt good about putting that into a book in like a manual form. I just thought that, fables tend to connect so much better. And actually by detaching it from a specific sport, it would probably have a greater impact for every sport because it wasn't delving into the weeds and minutia of a specific sport.
Correct. Yes. And I think it definitely does that. It's got business applications. It's got general life applications. So, and it sort of starts with this idea of you're always building your own house, which is a wonderful mantra. I've written it on my whiteboard. Could you give us that sort of the backstory to that?
Yeah. So there was this guy that grew up in England. He loved building, and he eventually, when he became an adult, he got a job building houses, and for 20, 30 years, he built houses. He beat on his craft. Eventually, he became known as one of the best in the world at building homes. And so then he beats on his craft. He becomes one of the best in the world. Eventually, he goes to his wife and his boss, and he's like, hey, I want to retire. Like, I want to play 9 holes before 9 a.m. I want to focus on all these other things in my life. And so his boss is like, John, the one thing, we have this huge client that's coming up, and there's this big, really important house that we have, and we decided like you have to be involved in this project. And so he's like, I don't know, I'll go home, I'll talk it over with my wife. And he does that, and his wife is like, John, like, what's one more home to build for them? They've done so much for our family. And so the thing is when he goes to build this house, he tells his boss, this is the last one. I'm not building any more homes for you. And he's like, yeah, no big deal. Well, what had made John great wasn't talent. What had made John great was that he poured his heart and his soul into every single project, everything that he did. He never left any stone unturned, and he made sure that he selected the finest materials. He was just meticulous about the process. But with this house, his heart wasn't in it. He was just going through the motions, and he knew that he was good enough. He'd built up enough skill. He could get through it. But he knew in his gut that it was far from his best work. So eventually the inspectors come, they finish up, and he goes to his boss, and he's like, all right, man, I did it. Like, here you go. Like, I'm done. Like, please give me your blessing to retire. And his boss is like, yeah, John, no big deal. Just one more thing. And he pulls open his desk drawer, and he hands him this little felt black box. And John's like, what's this? And he opens it up, and inside of it is a shiny set of new keys to that house that he just built. And he said, John, you were the most important client that we've ever had. The house is yours. And John is like, no, if I had only known this whole time that like this was my house, I would have put my heart and soul into this. I wouldn't have cut corners. Like, I can't believe that this was my house. And so I always tell that story in speaking engagements because it took me a really long time to realize that it didn't matter what sport I was playing or game or conversation I was having or whatever it was that I was doing in my life. I was always building my own house. I was the one that was going to be having to live in that house. And so yeah, it's a story that a lot of people love to hear.
Is that a true story?
It's a good question. For the way I had heard it originally, yes, but it's been so long ago, I'm not sure.
Yeah. So every decision that you make, everything you put, you give your attention to, essentially, is saying that is, the world that you are living in.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to that new scorecard. It's not about this outcome. It's all these little decisions that we're making on a day-to-day basis. We might think that it's about our significant other or our job or our, employees or whatever it is that we're doing, but really all those decisions that we're making are all the little choices that comprise the house that we live in. Mm-hmm. And then I like the example even more because oftentimes who we become in the house that we live in, that gets passed down generation to generation of the choices that I made. If I ever end up having kids, they will dramatically impact my kids' lives. The choices my dad made dramatically impacted my life. The fact that he was willing to work and sacrifice and go from living in a trailer park to becoming an eye surgeon, like that dramatically changed the trajectory of my life based off of how he built his house.
Yeah. Another thing you talk about, I believe it's in Pound the Stone actually, but it's this idea of cutting the rope. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, does that have any application to like the things that are passed down to us? In that sense, you were writing about sort of like limitations that you're placing on yourself, but what about...
Well, it's not just limitations that we place on ourselves, it's limitations that we've come to believe, however we've come to believe those. So the example that we give is the elephant in the animal park, and they just have a small rope that they're held back by with a small little human being, and they believe that rope keeps them tied down, because when they were young, they get tied to a tree that's stronger than they are, and so they pull and pull and pull and pull, but they can never break it, and what ends up breaking is their will. And they come to believe that anytime that rope is tied to their leg, that means that they're stuck. And so we do that, and so we ask people to think about, what are the ropes that you need to cut in your life? What are the stories that you believed about yourself that maybe were true at one point, but that are no longer true? Maybe they served you at one point, but they're no longer serving you. And sometimes that comes from our parents. Sometimes that comes from coaches. Sometimes that comes from teachers. Sometimes we don't even know where it comes from. But we develop these beliefs, and it's always a good idea to check in with what do I believe about people? What do I believe about myself? What do I believe about life? What do I believe about exercise? What do I believe about food? What do I believe about these things? Because those are ropes, and sometimes those ropes are helpful, and sometimes they're no longer serving us, and we need to cut the ropes in order to free ourselves to actually live the life that I believe that we were created to live.
So there's a tremendous amount of self-awareness and sort of self-analysis that it seems like that technique in particular, and a lot of these, like, that it requires. Mm-hmm. Is there anything when you work with athletes, are there any tricks to that trade at getting good at that? Are there like sort of hacks or is it just something you have to develop and be really sort of honest with yourself about? I think
it's both and. So I think it's taking a hard look in the mirror and going, who am I really? Where am I really? Developing that self-awareness, but also it's having hard conversations with people around you and asking them, like, hey, who am I? What am I good at? What do I struggle with? Where do I need to improve? Whether that's a coach, whether that is friends, family, coworkers, bosses. But the more that we will develop that self-awareness, I think that self-awareness is a superpower. And the more that you understand who you actually are, not who you think you are, but who you actually are, it's a huge superpower in life.
Is that something that you still use today? Are you constantly sort of surveying people around you?
Yeah, it's more, I would say that it's something I naturally have always done. I would say I'm always my own biggest critic. Mm-hmm. It's very rare that it virtually never happens where somebody's like, oh, you struggle with this, or you don't realize. I'm like, no, I realize. I know. I'm painfully aware of all the different things. But again, it kind of goes back to that. I might care about what other people think. I just don't allow what other people think to be the driving force in my life. And ultimately, I'm gonna go back home every day, and I'm gonna look at that scorecard, and I'm gonna look myself in the mirror, and I'm gonna have to to deal with those things with really high levels of self-awareness.
Yeah. So I too would categorize myself as my own worst critic. I think as of recent, and I mean recent, I'm talking years, it's become somewhat it's gone from productive to not productive,
right,
to limiting that. And I think self-doubt's incredibly important. I think without it, I think you're kind of sometimes that's your engine. Mm-hmm. A lot of the times you need that, But I think it was getting to a place where it wasn't productive. So I was really happy to find in your books this idea of a what went well journal.
Yeah.
I've done it for 10 days straight now.
Okay.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
It's you can explain it better than me, but essentially it's sort of two mission statements or reminders off the top, and then 15 things you did well.
At least 15.
At least 15 things. And I'm telling you, when I'm in bed at night, it is like I'm like, well, I put the peanut butter back in the pantry. Some days I just don't have it.
It's so funny because we're so bad about nitpicking the stuff we do not good enough.
Yeah.
But it's like anything that like we actually did well, oh, well, that wasn't a big deal. It's like, yeah, but you blow up these things over here on the other side. So maybe like, let's just for like 6 months to a year, let's suspend that and let's blow up this stuff on the other side. And look, this, I think that what went well journals are a really, really valuable tool in golf. I think they're a really valuable tool. Oftentimes, I was talking with the Stanford and Cal coaches yesterday about this, that, when I would work with female athletic programs, they generally speaking struggle with self-confidence, doubt, and things like that. So what went well journal for them is the hardest thing in the world to do and the most beneficial. When I go work with like UVA men's basketball and programs like that on the men's side, men's basketball and football, it's almost the opposite. That it's two sides of the same coin in terms of ego, but this one comes off as arrogance, typically, generally speaking, with male athletes, and then on this side, it's like a lack of belief over here. And they're two sides of the same coin, but with men's basketball and men's football, a what went well journal isn't always what they need. They're great at coming up with everything they think they did amazing. And it's like, hey man, you actually suck at a lot of stuff and your shit does stink. But that's not the challenge that they struggle with, coming up with those things.
Super interesting. I never considered that. What on that note, what role do you find that ego plays in greatness or in sort of high level performance? Like, is that something you view as a weapon, something that needs to be? Is it a double-edged sword?
It's a double-edged sword, and I think it depends on context. So I think for some people, it can be used in ways that it fuels their performance. I think that ego is a huge enemy for most people, and that just because it helped us get to a certain point, that oftentimes when we get to a different level, we're going to need to squelch that and really deal with that face on, because I think that there's a lot of issues that can come if it goes unchecked.
Yeah. You think of like ego when it's glorified, and it's just Kobe comes to mind, right? Yeah. And that was the sort of like the poster boy for ego when it goes right, you know? And I don't know if that's the healthiest example for most of us.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So we're joined a brief interlude with Joshua's coach, Sam Sir. It's a pleasure to meet you. You're here at San Diego Country Club. You've also played on tour for a long time. You're somewhat of a legend in the Southern California golf circuit. So we're here talking today about Joshua's his work, his books, his mind, the way his mind works, and also his sort of rapid improvement that he's documented in the game of golf. So tell me a little bit, what do you remember about first meeting him and where his golf game was at that time?
It was a bit sporadic for sure. He's obviously a great athlete. That obviously helps a lot. Work ethic was really good. He retained information really well. Mm-hmm. So obviously that helps a lot as well. I do remember it was really inconsistent. He didn't have kind of the right matchup for what he was doing. It was a little unorthodox. He did unnecessary things, made it a little bit more complicated than it needed to be. But a lot of good. I had a lot to work with, basically, for sure.
What is what do we mean in golf when we talk about matchups, and why is it so? Joshua and I were talking earlier about, finding a swing that really works for people. I use the example of Max Homa working with Mark Blackburn, who really found out that he had, some kind of a weakness in his hips, in the sort of hip trail hip turn and load and stuff like that. And it wasn't until they sort of learned that and accepted it that they were really the light bulb came on for him. So as you're coaching people, how is it that you find what may work, what they can't do, what they can do, parse out all of that, and then start to build on something?
Yeah, so that's a great thing. Mark's a really smart guy. Obviously, we have things like swing catalysts, all these kinds of things that help us with that. Pressure plates, 3D. I didn't use a ton of that with Joshua. I have used a lot of that in my learning process for sure. I look a lot about how the body's built, how long your biceps are, where they are, your elbows are compared to where your hip joints are. That shows you how much side bend you need, hitting the golf ball, all that kind of stuff, length of the club, all that stuff. So there's definitely biomechanics involved with understanding what people need. Matchups of just wrist angles, how the body moves, and then the shot shapes that they want to hit, right? So 3 patterns of, if somebody's trying to hit a pull cut, it looks a lot differently than somebody trying to hit a straight cut, and then somebody trying to hit a draw. How the sternum and pelvis match up are a lot different. So things like that was basically things that I was going after. You can see that stuff. 2D, obviously easier to see on 3D, but you can definitely see that. And then with people with mobility things, he's really good with his hands. He likes feeling things in his hands. Getting to what people like to do is huge. Getting feels that they like to do, because under pressure, they're going to want to go to that. That's huge. So for him, he was very very good at communicating what he liked and what he didn't like. He's relayed to me I don't need to understand it. You just need to let me know, and then I'll
tell me what to do.
Yeah, just tell me what to do, and I'll get that, and then we'll get the feels that he likes. So I think a lot of that has to do with it as well. But their mobility issues, all that kind of stuff, definitely needs to be told. Which, like I said, he did communicate to me. So we did work around what he was good at, what he could do, and we built a pretty solid game around that. He has really good elbow movement, very consistent with the way he delivers a club, way he moves his body is pretty well, obviously. He used a lot of verticals. Just matchup just depending on your body, what you like to see, and what you're trying to do.
So what is the truth from your eyes watching rapid progress like that? It's labeled as a 15 to a +3 in a matter of years, and then low single digits 5 to a club champion at a really good players club here with a lot of talent quickly. So how much work did you see him put into it? What's the truth about what it takes to get that good quickly?
Man, he definitely put in some time. I mean, I was still playing a bit as well, so we were probably playing we probably played 3 to 5 times a week sometimes. No, there was definitely work involved. I mean, I would guess that he would probably practice for an hour or 2 on his own. I wasn't there obviously the whole time. I was definitely there when we were playing. We played a lot of holes together. His IQ got very good pretty quickly, but there was a lot of small nuances that you need to know and understand, and wind and how to judge his clubs better, how to control his flights a little bit better, how to control spin a little bit better. All the things that you need to know to play good golf, especially under pressure. Go-to shots, what he felt comfortable doing. Just holding it, hitting cuts, whatever it would be. But I mean, there was tons of work put in for sure. We played a lot of golf. I would guess, let's just say 2 or 3 times a week to be safe. Probably, weeks. We probably did let's just say out of a month, we probably played 2 or 3 times a week for 3 of the 4 weeks. So, I mean, he was putting in a lot of work. And the other week he's still playing. I just wasn't playing there all the time with him because I was traveling and stuff. But no, lots of work.
Is that? Would you say that there's often discussions on play versus practice, right? I fall on the play side. Mm-hmm. I just feel like that's where feels and stuff are developed. I think there's a lot of Joshua and I can get into it later about sort of the dangers of practice.
Yes.
Where do you fall on that?
I think there's a balance. Now, saying that, I'm definitely more on the side of playing more than you would practice, for sure. I definitely think that people don't practice efficiently. I definitely think there needs to be a little bit more variable. I definitely think that when you're working on building neuroplasticity, or you're trying to build motor patterns, you need a bit of practice to build in patterns. You need to be able to trust it better on the golf course. So obviously if you're playing, the adjustments that you're making, you're going to get it faster when you're on the golf course than if you were just sitting on a driving range, because there's no consequences, you know? So I definitely think there needs to be a little bit of practice when you're working on feel, when you're working on technique, you know, things like that. You need practice, but definitely more on the playing side for sure. And I think that if you had a choice, if you're trying to get better faster, you're going to get better faster playing than you would just practicing. But now saying that you need to have solid, you know, kind of fundamental part of your practice to be able to do that. So, you know, having enough block variable directive and making sure that you're doing enough. There is a little bit involved, because obviously when you're training for tournaments and stuff, you need a little bit more block. Like, there is all sides to that, but I would say playing more than anything.
Generally, once you have a solid foundation, play and develop the playing skills and scoring skills.
Uneven lies, all these kinds of things that you don't get on driving range. Huge. Understanding where your golf ball goes, how to miss, all that stuff.
So you've been described in this book as an extremely conservative player as far as strategy goes. Okay. What would you, well, first of all, what does that mean, I guess? What do you think that means? And what would be, as far as, you know, on the, as far as managing your game, what would be the case for that?
Okay, so I do think that people try to do too much. I think that amateurs think that they're better than they are. I think pros know that they're not as good as they are, kind of thing at the same time. Like, I think there's a good understanding of that. So I do think that people try to do too much. So I do think there's more risk than involved. It's not a complete percentage thing or anything. I do think there's times to be aggressive or to take a different line, but that's also under certain circumstances. And I would just say that you would have full conviction over your target that you have. So if your target is 1 flag stick left of it, or your target was 20 feet, 50 feet left of it, you still have full conviction to where your target is, period. But some targets are a little bit more aggressive than others. But the generality is yes, like you would want to play a little bit more conservative than other, because you're trying to avoid bogeys more than trying to make a bunch of birdies. So I think that people try to make birdies and take unnecessary risk when, you know, you really couldn't pull off the shot 8 out of 10 times. So, you know, leaving yourself a wedge shot that you can hit, you know, within 20 feet quite often is a good play. So you're taking bogey out of the play and you're bringing in a birdie, because you can make a putt, you know. So I am big on that and doing all the little things really well.
I think where that also comes in too, though, in what I would see, and we can maybe talk about this a little bit later, is that there's a massive difference between real golf and what gets played at most golf clubs.
Sure.
And so somebody like Sam that played real golf his entire life, and when I say real golf, I mean stroke play, 4-day events, the difference in your mindset in terms of real golf versus match play and, you know, 2-down autos and next one's good and things like that are radically different. And so I think when I described him as an extremely conservative golfer, that's because when you are playing real golf, the consequences are so much greater when you make a poor decision and you execute poorly, versus in match play, it's throwaway. But so for somebody like him that his whole life he spent playing real golf, and that's why I would argue I'm a little bit better at real golf, or a lot better at real golf than I am at match play, country club golf, because of his influence that I don't miss in the wrong spots very often. I don't go at pins that I shouldn't go at. And it's kind of been hardwired in from him that even when I try and do that and change that, it's my conditioning is so much more like his stroke play mindset and all the time I spent caddying for him, that that's where I think that comes from. That most people, I would say 99% of people that play golf have never played real golf in their entire life.
Correct. Yeah. Well, so this goes back to your point of training, you know, for your toughest sort of set of conditions, right? And so when you get into stroke play, it's often you know, this is the environment you train for. Yeah. Whereas, but scraping away 3-footers and stuff like that doesn't do much. I will say, like, this is the part that is difficult when we talk about junior golfers and things like that. And if you want to get them on a track, you know, to a high level college golf or tour golf, it's somewhat disheartening because you're almost saying like, yes, your kid can go out and shoot, 38, 37, 36, even one under at your local home course for 9 holes. But that's not even the it's essentially like playing horse versus playing, 5-on-5 pickup basketball. It's just not the same sort of simulation, and it's not the same sort of game. So I don't know, are there ways that you can go about practicing that? People can go about practicing that sort of getting into that mindset in their own time?
And you mean just training for tournaments?
Yeah, well, just like sort of pushing yourself to play, to practice under the highest level of conditions, practicing under pressure, practicing like as if they were playing in a tournament. Are there certain things you guys would do when you would play together that push Joshua to really be fit for tournament golf?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things involved with that for sure. We definitely practice a lot, like hitting the uncomfortable shot, the shot that he wouldn't want to play, and make sure that he's good in uncomfortable environments. That's definitely different. People, usually just try to hit the shot that's comfortable. We definitely trained a lot like that, because then when you get uncomfortable, you know what you're doing. And there's a lot of other factors involved and a lot of other things that we can do. And he can explain to you as well that we've done for sure. And what I help with some of my tour guys and all the other guys that I'm helping, I try to put them in a good environment, like a tournament, that there is consequences, or in environments that are harder to learn in, whether that's, getting their heart rate up, whatever it is, to get them in situations that it does get them, more prepared, I would say, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So while I have you, this is a Golfers Journal podcast. Later this year, we are playing our air quote club championship here at San Diego Country Club in November. It's the first time we've done this event. We're going to do a series of remote local qualifiers around the country. And then some people, we're running a program this year which is called the Index Experiment. We're measuring the differentials of index across a couple thousand people. So if you give people the right tools, provide them with high-level coaching, you provide them with resources and some community support, how much better can you get in sort of a group setting versus just, Hack to Scratch is an index experiment, essentially project, but it was done individually. So what does that do for the group? So what can you tell me about San Diego Country Club, the golf course, the club, and the culture here? Because I've really enjoyed my time coming down here. I always find myself in a money game and losing money every time I play. I find people with unorthodox swings that somehow get it in the hole. Like, what is going on at this place?
Yeah, no. I've been here since January. I played down here a little bit, obviously, when I was in college and stuff. It's a great club, great environment. They got some good group of guys out here. I've enjoyed my time here. There's definitely been a few unorthodox swings that guys get the job done. They just know how to score. They know how to leave themselves in good spots. So no, there is definitely part of that. And my advice for your tournament and playing, just definitely look, where they're going to put pins, where you want to leave yourself. Short side is not always bad, because sometimes you have the uphill chip and the uphill putt to it. So people don't really think about that. But here the greens are undulated, so you definitely need to leave yourself in good spots.
And they're small.
Yeah, they are smaller. It's an old school course, so old school courses tend to have smaller greens, and a lot of undulation, so they play smaller than they are. So yeah, definitely leaving yourself in good spots and playing a little bit of angles when you can. The course, they've taken out a lot of trees, so you can kind of hit it a lot more wide off the tee. So playing your angles a little bit, making sure that you can get to pins, you can use slopes to get to it. That stuff is all really big in scoring well here. For sure. So
is it the course that sort of has built the players sort of culture here, or is that just what goes on in south of San Diego?
I think it's the money games we play in.
Yeah,
we play under a lot of pressure, and I think we were really blessed. Sam saw him yesterday. There's 3 guys here. Scotty Patel is the GOAT of Southern California in terms of players. Brent Lawrence, his best friend, is a 2-time club champ from Elk River, and then Daryl Miller. And those 3 guys are absolute studs. And they used to play with us. Brent and Scotty would play every single day, and we played for a lot of money. And I think that those 3 really beat a lot of us into a group that plays pretty well under pressure, because you knew that if you were playing against Scotty, Daryl, and Brent, if you messed up, you were going to pay. They don't make very many mistakes. And so it's an environment that is high pressure, high stakes, with really good players at the bottom. And so I think that environment really churns out. There's quite a few of us that play pretty good when we go play in tournaments other places. And I think that it's truly a testament to Scotty Patel, number one. But then, Daryl Miller and Brent Lawrence are close seconds. That having guys like that have played in so many events and won so many events, that they really foster an environment and competition that makes you get better, or else you can't survive.
Yeah. So play for money, play with people that are better than you, and play a lot. So
100%. Yeah. Those are all great things.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sam. It was a pleasure talking with you. I look forward to getting back in November. Absolutely. And to the renovation, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So we're almost to the golf, hardcore nerd golf talk here. But just a few things on some little bits of wisdom that I found in your books I want to ask you about. What do you mean by we should be living by principles instead of feelings? And I guess a follow-up question to that will be, if we do this correctly and we live by principles, are we still allowed to feel?
Great questions. I think I first heard Eric Thomas talk about that, and he has a quote, something along the lines of, at the end of every principle is a promise, at the end of your feelings is nothing. Something like that. And the first thing, yes, we're allowed to feel things. Again, we're human beings. We're going to feel things. But it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier in terms of, do we allow it to be the driving force in our life? Or is it something that we feel, we acknowledge, and then we commit to what we committed to, and we execute on what we committed to when the feelings are gone, whether they're good feelings or bad feelings. One thing I work with clients on a lot is to be very careful of, you can feel however you feel, but be very careful of the label that you give those feelings and the story that you tell yourself about those feelings. Because if we label something, oh, I'm nervous and I have anxiety, well, that's a label. That's not a real thing. That's just a label. You have things that you're feeling, but the label that you're giving those things is giving it negative power in your life. Instead of, well, I'm excited, or good. Yeah, man, this is great. Like, I got these things in my stuff. Like, I'm so excited. It's very different. So being very careful about that. But to me, the principles over feelings is really just like, if you just look in lots of different ancient scripts or books, Stoics, the Bible, plenty of self-help books, there's just principles that have stood the test of time. And let's focus on the principles and living out the principle, because that has stood the test of time, and we know what's going to come from that, or at least we have a good idea that if we are faithful in the small things, that it's going to produce good fruit. If we just live based off of our feelings, well then, think about it in terms of people that are masters at their craft. I've said for a long time, the big difference between a professional and an amateur is that amateurs do it when they feel like it. Professionals do it no matter what. Like, I showed up, I flew all day, got to someplace in Pennsylvania, landed at, I think, 5:30, got in my rental car, drive an hour and a half. I get to the event like 1 minute before 7 o'clock, and that's when I was supposed to speak. And I literally had food that I'd brought with me from home, and the lady sees it, and she's like, oh, we got a microwave. We'll give you an extra 15 minutes. And I looked at her probably like she was crazy, and I go, no. I go, the event starts at 7. I'll be on stage at 7. She's like, what? And I'm like, I'm a professional. Like just because I haven't eaten, just because I haven't done, whether I haven't slept, whether, no matter what's going on, I'm a professional. And that means that I'm going to step up and execute no matter how I feel. And I'm not going to allow my feelings to dictate my behavior. I can go, you know what? There's days where I have more energy than I have today. There's days when I've slept better. There's days when I'm hitting it better. But it doesn't matter how I feel. I am going to live by principles that I know, that I've studied ancient wisdom and seen what has been true for a long time. It's one of the reasons why I don't really listen to podcasts. People are always like, you don't listen to podcasts? No, because what people talk about in podcasts oftentimes is current events and the current fads. If you're willing to put something in a book, books have to stand the test of time. Twitter and Instagram and Threads and TikTok and YouTube, those things don't always have to stand the test of time. And so I like searching for ancient wisdom that has shown for a very long time something to be true. And let's focus on that, not on temporary feelings, because my feelings are going to change day to day. It's why I talk about operating out of conviction instead of confidence. People are like, well, like confidence is so important. No, confidence is a feeling. One day you're going to wake up, you're going to feel confident. One day you're not. You may be confident for the first 6 holes, and then all of a sudden something happens and that is gone. I don't want to be dependent on confidence. I want to forge myself in the fire so that I can operate with conviction no matter how I feel. That I've done the work. I have done the training. I have done all the things that I need to do so that I can operate with conviction. Because conviction is not determined based off of how I feel in any given moment. It is making a choice to push myself to do hard stuff, uncomfortable things over and over and over again, so that I've been forged in the fire so that I can operate with conviction and I don't have to worry about, well, I don't feel, or, oh man, I feel great today.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how I feel. I can look that in the face and go, this is what it is. But I'm still going to operate with conviction.
So the feelings are saying the feelings are still valid, but the label that you give them can be invalid or just sort of like,
well, it's not about whether it's invalid or valid. Is this the most beneficial and constructive label that I can give this? If I'm the one coming up with the rules,
sure.
So like there's a kid that played it on our team at UCLA that I love, like a little sister to me, Carrie Korver. Her cousin is Kyle Korver, the famous NBA player. She was also an incredible shooter, one of the best in Division I basketball. And a couple different times she came up to me and she's like, Joshua, I had a really bad warm-up, and when I have a bad warm-up, I have a bad game. And I'm like, hold on. You're one of the best shooters in the country. I don't care if you missed every single shot in your warm-up. You always play better after you have a bad warm-up. She's like, what? I'm like, yeah, you always play better. Like if you get to make the rules, like this is what we don't understand sometimes at a conscious level. Like we're the one making these rules. That like, oh, well, if I don't put my right sock on or if I don't have my this, then I'm going to play bad. Well, when it's cold, I always play bad. Like we're making up these rules. So if we're the ones that have the power to make up the rules, why don't we create rules that actually help us instead of hinder us? Why don't we create rules that serve us instead of us being shackled by these rules? So that's where we have to be really careful with these labels, is that there's power of life and death in the tongue. There's power in words. There's power in these things. And so it's, if I label this something, there's usually going to be a direct impact on how I operate based off of the label that I give that. So is this label serving me or is this label shackling me?
It's a very liberating concept of making up your own rules. It's really cool. All right, let's talk about golf. I want to talk about how you go from a 15 to a +3 in a matter of years. But, I mean, stepping back, what is it about? It didn't sound like you came from a golfing family. There is some good golf in Broken Arrow nowadays. I don't
There's
know.
There's some amazing golf in Broken Arrow. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. But what was it that attracted you to the game of golf to begin with? And then really give me where it goes from attracted to, peak sicko mode?
Yeah. So, growing up poor, dreaming about Happy Meals, dad having grown up in a trailer park, golf, country clubs they just weren't on the menu for us. And so, like I said earlier, I went to a golf camp when I was 13. It was like a $25 pitch and putt. And that was my first real opportunity and access to it. But again, it was still too cost prohibitive to really invest the time. And it was a little bit too late. At that point, we knew, both my brother and I played Division I soccer. My brother that drowned would have done the exact same thing. Like, we knew that these other sports were the avenues to college opportunities were a lot better for us at that late of an age. And so it wasn't really until I got to Duke that at Duke we could play the Duke golf course for pretty cheap. So about once a week in the off season, Joe Germanese and I would go play at our local golf course. And then it really wasn't until I keynoted the Women's College Golf Convention with Condoleezza Rice probably 10 years ago. And all of a sudden, I got access to and started working with a ton of Division I golf programs. And so they started introducing me to the game, and I finally was able to play free golf and things like that. And so that really started to change my life in terms of golf. And then 7 years ago, I basically decided to retire and come down to San Diego, and that was a golf decision. Torrey Pines has a local rate for city residents, and I didn't understand country club memberships. I didn't understand junior memberships, so I'd cut my teeth professionally in Los Angeles, but then it was like all the clubs in LA, I didn't know what a junior membership was. I didn't know anything about that. And so it was like, if I want to play golf at a championship golf course, the only one I can afford is if I move to San Diego and have a city card and be able to play at Torrey Pines. So that was really why I moved down here. And then I just, so I'd kind of fallen in love with golf at that point. I think that, being on the autism spectrum, I love to work at things. I used to do Pistol Pete drills, roll up the carpet in the living room and do Pistol Pete basketball drills and things like that. And so if you were to come to my apartment today and, when we talk to Sam a little bit, he thinks certain things of how I got good. I would argue why I got really good at tournament golf is because my mat at home that's right beside my TV and my chair rolls at a 15. And I try and roll 100 to 200 balls a day on my mat at home. And so I have a chapter in From Hack to Scratch called From 12 Feet and In. If you get really, really good from 12 feet and in tournament golf, you're going to be a weapon. And so I tend to struggle. Like, at times throughout the year, my handicap will get up to as high as a 4 or 5 because we don't keep our greens at tournament speeds. And my ball striking is not that good. What saves me in tournaments is my short game and putting. And I tend to miss a lot more putts. So one of our friends that Casey Young, says everybody knows Medcalf can't putt on slow greens. But if you give me greens that roll at a 13 to a 14, I tend to make a lot of putts. And so I tend to train for tournaments. I don't train as much for day-to-day golf.
Sure.
If we have a big tournament coming up, I'll spend 2 weeks in preparation for that and really try and ramp up to make sure that I've had a lot of injuries over the last 2 years. That's the other reason why my handicap tends to fluctuate. I have to go to PT 2-3 times a week. Sometimes that's not even enough to keep me able to practice and play. But I think that the real transformation for me in golf was, one, having the access of being able to play a lot. But Sam Sierra's influence on my game is just undeniable, and the amount of how my IQ grew by getting to play a lot with somebody like him who is a savant in the game. There may be lots of people that are better golfers than him, even though a lot of people that, I hosted Tom Kim and Sam when Tom was 17 years old at the Farms. And I said, Tom, I'm going to bet on Sam. And Tom was like, no, I can't beat Sam. And then last week at the US Open, or 2 weeks ago at the US Open, Gunn was here and Sam was coaching him and on his bag. And Gunn is the exact same way. Gunn's like, I can't beat Sam. Andrew Putnam, people like that will tell you, yeah, Sam beats us in cash games a lot. And so, but the thing about him that I think is so special is that his golf IQ is just freakishly high. And I was able to absorb a lot of that. And so when I was helping him kind of build his coaching business, one of the things that I told him I want you to focus on is doing 9-hole playing lessons, because I really believe that how I got good was, like I said, from playing with great players and having to figure it out on the golf course. So the guy that I call the GOAT, and a lot of people call the GOAT of Southern California golf, Scotty Patel, he doesn't really practice. Shows up to the first tee and he goes and plays. So he's used to having to figure it out on the golf course versus being able to go to the driving range and find something and then take that. He has to find it every single day out on the golf course. And then that makes him a lot more comfortable in tournament golf of being able to find it without needing to go to the range, without needing a coach, having to figure that out. So I think those are some of the things. And then, there's definitely an element of luck in certain things. When I won the club championship, Craig Davis decided not to play that year. Jimmy Harris, one of the best players at our club, got knocked out in the first round by the guy that I played in the finals. And, golf is a funny game. I had it going 2 weekends in a row. The day before I played in the semifinals, I played with our assistant pro, Thomas Chu, and in 9 holes, I was 9 over. And the next day I went out and shot 2 under. So, golf is a weird, funny game, but I do know that a lot of the training that I have done has prepared me to, Casey Young, again, our friend, he texted me one time after that 9 holes, I texted him and I was like, I don't know, man. The only thing I can hope is that when speaking, this started to happen to me, that sometimes when I would try and prepare for a talk, I couldn't remember stories before getting on stage. And I just had to trust that when the lights clicked on, that it would come back to me. And it normally did in spades. And I said, maybe it's like that. And he texted me, and I kind of get emotional about it. But I just made a bag, and I have this on the inside of it, that he said, the bright lights are JMM's sanctuary. And so, I know that a lot of the stuff that I've done in training is alternative, but it's really pushed me to embrace and be excited about the bright lights, the uncomfortability, like leaning into that stuff. I think has, like, to me, handicaps are the most silly thing in the world. It's not ironic to me that a lot of people that belong to country clubs and vote Republican drive through the gates and immediately become raging socialists, liberals that want their handicaps and they believe in pulling themselves up by their bootstraps until it comes to golf. They believe in working hard and, taking control of your own destiny until it comes to golf. And in golf, they want their strokes. It's the only game that exists that way. It's a very, very strange concept to me. I think people would get a lot better at golf if there was no such thing as handicaps. That's a side note.
I would love to do a separate podcast on handicaps with you.
I mean,
sounds like it'd be awesome.
It is the most strange thing. Growing up playing I call them real sports the way that I did, you just have to get better or you get beat. That's it. Yeah. There's no handicaps. But so I don't focus too much on my handicap. That was just after that club championship in 2021 with plugging in the scores, I got to a +3. These days, I don't tend to focus on that at all. I try and focus on, number one, my body and getting my body to be able to move okay. I've had body issues since I was 14, 15 years old. Even at Duke, one of the reasons why I didn't play professional soccer was because before every game, John Rennie, our coach, would come up to me and say, how many minutes can you play? And it was usually between 20 and 40 out of a 90-minute game. So I've dealt with that for a long time. But to me, it's that pursuit of mastery. It's trying to just sharpen areas of my game and be able to do things inside of my game that it's like, oh man, a year ago I may have had a better handicap, but I couldn't do this.
Sure.
Maybe I was better at this, and there, that fluctuates as well. There's times whenever I felt like I was a +6 from the sand, but then, there's times in the last year where I've, been shanking balls left and right out of the sand. And the other day, and on the most important hole in that game that we play in is the 18th hole, and I have a 25-yard bunker shot. I hit the ball dead in the middle of the club, out of bounds, and I was 1 under, and I, make a triple on 18. So, golf is a funny, finicky game, but to me, it's that, just loving it and loving to put in the right type of practice and putting myself in those competitive environments to try and get better and compete.
Yeah. And so it seems like you've taken what you learned in your process in your own golf journey and are now able to fuse it with the clients that you work with. But you've also told me that you do some really just outside alternative, maybe we should call it, some alternative techniques to prepare these professional or high-level amateur players to be comfortable when uncomfortability sets in, or uncomfortableness.
So the only thing, yes, completely, and I'll go into that. The only thing I would say is that I was working with people in golf long before I was good at golf.
Important distinction.
But golf is such a weird and different game and animal. I didn't want to put anything down on paper because I didn't feel like I had the credibility to do it. Because, I wasn't very good at golf. I was okay, but I was probably in the top 40% of people that play golf. So to put something down on paper versus going, for a year I was the director of mental training for Oregon Women's Golf, and, worked with a ton of different golf programs, but those were just conversations. And I would do workshops and I would explain, well, here's the difference between random practice and block practice. And here are the things that I think that would be helpful. And they oftentimes were, but I've always had an issue with a lot of people in my industry because they can't play. Whether that's golf, whether that's soccer, whether that's basketball, a lot of the people that are teaching, and especially sports psychology, cannot do what they're talking about.
So do you, can we just linger on this for a second?
Yes.
Because I got, I put out a sarcastic tweet about a year ago. And, well, I say sarcastic because there's always some truth in humor, right? But I had said something to the effect of there's a playing test when it comes to PGA professionals. You have to shoot whatever it is, 162 over 36 holes to get your PGM to pass your professional golf management program.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, so cool. They play a very simple setup. I think they play the white tees. All the pins are in the center of the greens. The course is slope rating's way down. It's very easy, but it's just sort of like a baseline.
Right. Can
you play? Yeah. The baseline of golf, whatever that is. And I said, well, why don't we do that with golf media? And, it's 3 days later of getting torn up, rightfully so, because there was no sarcasm font that's been added to that, to iPhone yet. I kind of gave it up, but I thought there was a little bit of truth in there, especially when we get to critiquing the best in the world at a game that is so unbelievably difficult. It's people cruel and unfair that all of the great poets and writers of our generation have tried to sum it up, and I don't think they have. And I don't think that until you've spent 8 to 10 hours of your day every day of your life without missing a day for 8 years, which I did in my golf career, playing through college and winning a Division II national championship, all this stuff. Until you do all that and commit that time and then step up on the 18th tee with a one-stroke lead and have to feel how different that is compared to every single rep you've ever done in your life, I don't know if you're in the best position to wax poetic on what just happened.
I lost my mind when people went off on Mito and what they said about him and everything in that situation at Southern Hills. That may not be the exact one you're talking about.
That was what spurred it, but yeah.
It is. I get very, very angry at people like that have no clue what it's like to to even, like I said, to even play real golf. They've never played real golf in their entire life.
Yeah.
And they think that they understand what it feels like to be holding something in your hand and not even, it feels like a foreign object in those moments. And you can be incredible as Mito is. And, and just have a situation that, and truthfully, people are like, oh, he hit the wrong club. Again, have you ever been there? Have you ever played in a tournament? Do you know what it's like to be standing there? First of all, the driver is the best club, in my opinion, to have in your hand because it got the biggest face. Because if you don't think you can hit the ball, having that giant face is important. I think he should have taken the target line a lot further left, and he would have been just fine. But still, like, we don't know what that's like unless you have done that. And most people will never know what it's like to be standing on the 18th tee at a major with a one-shot lead and what that feels like. So, but yeah, that playing test is great. And to me, that's just always been the most uncomfortable thing. And one of the reasons that was part of the passion behind what I have, devoted a lot of my life to, because when I talk about that guy, Mike Grella, that I finished second in points to at Duke, who was the best player in the country, he thought that Greg Dale was full of shit. He would never listen to him. It took 10 years into his professional career when he watched a couple of talks that I'd given. He's like, oh yeah, I've adopted all that stuff and it's been so helpful and it's what has allowed me to have a long career. And he now has the fastest goal in MLS history and a couple other, really cool things like that he's done. But he didn't listen to Greg Dale at Duke because he knew that Greg Dale was just regurgitating stuff he'd read in books. He couldn't do it.
Interesting.
And I always said, I want to get through to the kids like Mike Grella. And I knew that I could. So an example of that, I worked with Laura Diaz for a couple of years, and her husband was the assistant coach at Wake Women's Golf. So I went out to work with them, and they had this freshman who she was a phenom and really incredible. Her older sister was a senior. And, I'm there for 2 days, and I'd done my workshop, and we were out in the hitting bays. And I could just tell that she was just not interested at all in what I was talking about. And, I've always been a little bit optimistically delusional and loved to compete. And I was just kind of fed up. And so I said, hey, grab a wedge. She goes, what? I go, yeah, grab one of your wedges. She's like, why? And I'm like, grab a wedge. I go grab a wedge, a random wedge. And I said, you see that target out there? And they had a bullseye around 100 yards out. I go, let's see who can hit it first. I hit it on the second time. And I said, do you want to listen now with an expletive in there? I'm like, I'm not telling you stuff that I can't do. I'm trying to share with you things that have been transformative in my life and in my sports life as well. And you could just see the look on her face of like, oh, this is different.
Sure.
Yeah. And so I wish that there was more people. It doesn't mean you can't learn from people that can't do things, but there's way too many people out there, in my opinion. Like, one of the things that a lot of sports psychologists use is, oh, I'm only allowed to teach evidence-based practices. Oh, fascinating. When was Tiger Woods hooked up to equipment whenever he was playing in any of his US Opens and the Masters and the British? He wasn't. You don't know what was actually going on. And he can't articulate to you what was going on because he doesn't know. Our brains are processing 11 million bits of information per second. We're only conscious of 40 of those bits. And none of the stuff that happens in sports is done in a cute little nice neat scientific box where you're strapped in. And so when you say evidence-based practices, my question is, can you do what you're talking about? Or not? And most of them, the answer is no, they can't. And so, look, I'm definitely a little jaded in terms of that, but there's just too many people out there, I think, that are so confident in what they're teaching. And it's like, bro, if you're so good, like, why can't you play?
Sure.
Why can't you do this? Why do you teach and your kid is grown up under you and your kid can't get it done? Oh.
Yeah. And golf's a difficult one because it's just, I think there are some, to steelman that there are things, big themes that can be taught without doing them. It's just, if in the context of tournament golf, when you talk about if you're teaching the best players in the world, trying to get the elite just a little bit better, right? It helps to know what's going on under the hood in those moments.
The thing with the elite, though, is that the elite is already the elite. And a lot of these guys that get access to them, some of them have been able to help people that aren't the elite. But one of the things I think that makes Sam really special is, you know, he's helped people like Tom Kim. He's helped people like me win a club championship. He's helped Anchi down the street, who's a 45-year-old teacher, win her club championship. This random selection of people, not just the people who are freakishly talented and that we're going to be good no matter what you told them.
Sure.
I was just remembering the original question, though, of some of the alternative methods and things that that I share with clients. And so one of my favorite things to have clients do, and this isn't just for people in golf, but it's especially for people in golf, because one of the challenges, I remember that story Adam Scott tells of, being playing a money game before a major with Tiger Woods, and him seeing what Tiger hit, and then Tiger hitting a funny shot, and Adam pulling the same club and blowing it over the green, and Tiger going, "Don't ever look at my bag. Don't ever look at what I hit." But from all the majority of people that I've worked with, as you get to these different levels, they look and see, well, what is he hitting? Well, what club is he hitting? What club is she hitting? And they think that they should be doing the same thing, or that it's weird if they don't. And so one thing that I have clients do to work on this, because I think that one of the biggest things in terms of performance is being comfortable in the uncomfortable. That so much of golf is not about technique. It's not about your swing mechanics. It is who can be more comfortable in uncomfortable environments. It is a weird game that you hit a shot and it may be 10 minutes later until you hit the next shot. And a lot of our practice and training doesn't help us with that. We hit a bad one on the range, we immediately drop another one and hit another ball. So the exercise that I have people do is it's a self-hazing situation where they dress up like a clown. They dress up, if it's a male, they dress up in drag and makeup and a dress, and they go to the grocery store. They do normal life things dressed very uncomfortable and in ways that are incredibly uncomfortable for them, to just have to deal with those feelings of, okay, everything is okay. Everything is still okay. And constantly, intentionally seeking out those environments and pushing ourselves to be uncomfortable in safe places so that under the bright lights, we're more used to it. A good friend of mine, he works with a lot of guys on the PGA Tour, Jim Murphy, he has an exercise that he does with guys where he will have them intentionally hit a shot out of bounds or into a hazard without telling anybody else in the group during the round, so that they have to deal with those feelings. Same exact thing, because sometimes that's going to happen in a real round. So he's not saying do this in a tournament round, but in a practice round with your friends, hit a terrible shot on purpose without telling anybody that you're doing it. Same exact thing. Another drill that we have people do is called the 30-minute drill. So on the driving range, you only get to hit 10 balls in 30 minutes. And usually for people that play at a high level, they have their name on their bag. So people are watching how they practice, what they do. It's very strange to watch somebody only hit one ball every 3 minutes. But again, it's trying to deal with those feelings and train to become more comfortable being uncomfortable. It's one of the reasons why I don't hit very many balls. I try and do the Scotty Patel method of go straight to the first tee, warm up my body, but go straight to the first tee, because that's oftentimes how it feels to me in tournament golf. No matter how I was hitting it in the driving range, I get to that first tee or the 6th tee or the 18th tee, and all of a sudden I don't feel as comfortable. So another exercise that I think was tremendously helpful, I played in the national championship for club champions at Kiowa in February, and I thought that my cold water therapy training was one of the most beneficial things for how I ended up. I think I finished 19th out of 130th, and that was my first ever real stroke play event that I'd played in. And so, sitting in 40, 45 degree water for 10, 11 minutes, to me, it's not about, there's tons of research, and Wim Hof has done amazing things in moving the science forward. And I had the privilege of going out to Norway and studying under one of his top trainers, Intermountain Expeditions, and had a transformative experience there. But outside of the physical benefits, I think the mental benefits of just, I'm going to put myself in these super uncomfortable situations and I'm just going to sit and I'm going to deal with it, helps so much whenever things go sideways on the golf course. How do you deal with it when things are going sideways? Well, if you've run every single time things get uncomfortable in your life, it's going to be really hard to handle those things on the golf course. So really seeking out, being intentional to put yourself in really uncomfortable environments over and over again in the dark. One of our books is called Win in the Dark, so that when the bright lights turn on, you're comfortable being uncomfortable. That's a normal state for you, instead of, oh no, oh gosh, this.
Mm-hmm. This is the idea of state-based training that you write on. Actually, so one of the things my college coach did with me for 4 years, and all of us, is Monday. We qualified every single day at school. We had 0 practice days in 4 years. We played tournament conditions every single day.
Love it.
The only way that you were exempt for the next tournament is if you won individually. So it was a clean slate every week. There was no picks. You had to qualify in the top 5. And that lasted, there could be a 2-month qualifier, like when we get to school, or it could be 2 days in between tournaments, right? So it was a great way to just sharpen the competitive iron. But on Mondays, we weren't allowed to warm up, at all. And so you've been out partying, you've been not taking care of yourself. Maybe you skip Sunday to watch football all day, whatever, and you get back and you're holding a sledgehammer in your hand, and you have a 471-yard par 4,
and you got to figure it out.
And you just have to figure it out. And so most days now, honestly, but I'm a feel-based player by nature, so I much like Scotty, not as effectively, but I am constantly I'm changing feels mid-round, and I'm trying to diagnose, fix this feel for today, starting right, here's my feel for that, I got a quick pull hook, here's my fix for that. And so it's like this puzzle solving that's great, but without warming up and getting that feedback immediately, it just teaches you how to do it under pressure. So this, we were doing state-based training. I didn't have a name for it at the time, but I've noticed as I've gotten older that it's helped me, just sort of score and really play better golf and adapt to the environment. So one of the crazier things that I shouldn't say that word, but one of the crazier things state-based wise, you mentioned cold therapy, but you before the club championship, you did something on the opposite end of the uncomfortable spectrum. And you said you noticed you played better in a hoodie and like a cashmere hoodie and pants. We're in San Diego. It's not a lot of times where you need that. So I believe it was the day of the event, you went into the sauna in that outfit, and you sat for 25 minutes in a hoodie and pants in a sauna. So tell me why you did that.
So it's funny. So my mom showed up. My mom's only come down to San Diego, I think, twice. And the second time she came and she just lives 2 hours north of here now. And she came down on Friday night before the semis and finals. And she was telling my girlfriend, she was like, oh, Joshua's going to win. And I was like, Mom, what are you talking about? And she's like, that's what he's done his whole life. He'll find a way to win. And I'm like, Mom, golf is different. This isn't these other things. Golf is a very different animal. But she was saying that. And on that first round that she watched in the semis, she came up to me 7 or 8 holes in. And oftentimes I will play in Grayson joggers and a Grayson cashmere hoodie. It's how I feel most comfortable for playing golf. I don't know why, but it just is. And I also don't tend to change very often unless something is going wrong. If I'm swinging good, then I don't want to take off the whatever it is that I'm wearing, because that is going to be a different feel and my body's going to move a little bit different. In golf, a game of millimeters, that can impact the way that you're hitting it. So she comes up to me 7 or 8 holes in, because it was really hot. I think it was probably 84 degrees, and I'm still wearing a cashmere hoodie. And she goes, you need to take that off. And I snapped. And I'm not proud of, the way I snapped on her, but I was like, stay out of this. I'm going to do my thing. But then after the round, I realized, this is bothering everyone. This is making them uncomfortable. Me wearing this hoodie, especially a cashmere hoodie in this heat, is making them sweat. And so I made a commitment that during the finals, which was 36 holes, not just 18 of match play, I was going to keep that hoodie on for all 36 holes, or how many ever holes it ended up taking. And so that morning, I don't sleep very good before tournaments. And that morning I woke up early and I said, you know what? I'm going to go down to the sauna. And it wasn't the same outfit, but I put on a hoodie and I put it up and I sat on the hoodie for 20-25 minutes and just sweated. And it was that exact same principle of, this is going to be way hotter than it ever is out there on the golf course, and I'm going to train myself for this. So it's that Navy SEAL quote of, under pressure, you don't rise to the occasion, you sink to the level of your training. And this is why we train so hard. I want my training to be harder than competition. I want everything to be easier in competition. I want everything to be easier under the bright lights. Well, that means that I have to make my training so ridiculous that everything actually slows down. And so that's what I did, and that hoodie never came off. I think there's a picture in From Hack to Scratch where that blue hoodie is on, and it may have even gotten up to like 86, 87 that day. And thankfully, I got up 8 with 10 to play, so it got closed out, and we didn't have to get to all 36 holes. But yeah, I definitely attribute a lot of that comfortability to seeking out the uncomfortable. And I did that, it's convicting now, like, man, I need to be doing more of that stuff. That's probably why I'm not as good anymore as I used to be.
Yeah, it could be a lot of things. Like you said, I don't think there's anything more truer than you said today, than golf is different. And so, reading your books, I'm trying to read them through the prism of golf, which is an interesting exercise because, your golf seems to be maybe the only exception I can find to some of the rules. And I don't think they're exceptions, but they are, you could raise a question mark, right? So like with all these things that you talk about, have you found that maybe golf, there's a different path to mastery or greatness or whatever you want to call it that needs to be taken than other sports, other ventures? And I'm kind of asking that with the idea of practice in the background, this idea of like constantly pounding the stone and constantly going at it. Is there a danger to that path?
Well, I think there's a big danger to people that love to practice. Because they're the range rats. They're not practicing golf. They're practicing something else. You can't play golf on the driving range. The best thing you can do, you can try, and I have clients do this, is to, it's called random practice, but this aspect of random practice would be the closest thing to playing on the course. So I hit whatever I'm going to hit on number 1, I hit that off the driving range, and then however far I hit that, I approximate, I pick a target that's around that same number, and I try and hit to that target. If I hit that target, then if I have a putting green close by, I turn around and I putt from the approximate distance until the ball's in the hole. And then I go back and I play the second hole. If I don't have a putting green close by, I just, driver, wedge. Next hole, par 5. Driver, 5 wood, wedge. Next hole, really long par 3 wood. And you play the golf course on the driving range. But so one thing that I found really fascinating is, we talk about the concept of player B, and that player B tends to be better than player A. You drop another ball, oh wow, player B figured it out pretty quickly. Well, player B has at least a million bits more information in the body that knows how to swing it better than player A did. It doesn't always play out that way, but oftentimes, you hit a bad one, you drop another one, the mulligan, oh my God, second team All-American is the quote people like to say a lot. Well, but that's how people practice. Player A that actually plays real golf and in tournaments, he gets very few reps. Player B, player C, D, E, F, G, H, I, all the way to Z. Well, none of those guys get to play. Occasionally player B gets to play. You don't want him to play in a tournament. But there's also ways of understanding that can be really helpful. So where, like, if you're laying up and you're making a decision on what club to lay up with, well, sometimes, let's say I have 250 yards. Well, I could hit, something down around the green. Maybe I want to do that. But maybe what I want to do is I want to hit my 125 club and then hit another 125 club. So I'm using player B to my advantage in that situation where I'm getting to very quickly hit the same club again using all that information that's in my body, instead of I'm going to hit I'm going to hit a 6-iron down there and then a wedge. Well, what if I just hit pitching wedge instead of 6-iron, sand wedge? So there's ways of using that to your advantage. But most of the time, people that are range rats, they are not practicing golf. All they're doing is they're raising their expectation level. And as we know in golf, raising your expectation level is a very slippery slope to disaster. So you raise your expectation level without raising your skill level, and then it's a recipe for disaster.
It's bad combo.
Exactly. So that's why we, really push. You would very rarely see me hitting the same club twice on the driving range if I'm practicing. Truthfully, you'll very rarely see me practice full swings on the driving range unless Sam is there, and that's usually 2 weeks before a tournament. The only thing that I do to practice is chip and putt, and then I warm up. And so sometimes I'll hit balls to warm up, sometimes I won't. But if I am warming up for a tournament, this is where it flips. So what research has shown is that block practice is really good for retention day of. It's really bad for retention the next day and into the future. Well, again, there's ways of using that when it comes to tournaments in real golf. Day of tournaments, block practice, hitting the same club over and over again, ingraining that muscle memory that's going to really only stay with you for that day. But if I'm actually practicing with Sam, I'm going to be changing clubs every single time, because that is the best way, random practice, to actually get the retention to be higher. Why do we not like that? Well, because it's uncomfortable and it doesn't feel good. Mm-hmm. And most people practice to feel better. They don't practice to get better, whether they realize consciously or not that they're doing that. They're practicing to feel better. They're not practicing to actually get better. So once again, player A is getting very few reps, and they're increasing their expectations, and their skill level is staying the exact same for player A. Sure, player D, E, F, Z can do some ridiculous things. Go join a Topgolf league. But real golf, random practice is the ticket, especially for people that aren't pros, that can't hit balls every single day. You're playing once a week, you're playing once every 2 weeks. Random practice is the ticket.
Yep. Yeah, it's been out. I mean, it's a concept that's been out there for a long time. We don't want to, I guess, I think there's also some discipline involved with that, It's not like really that cool or fun to
it's annoying
to hit a thin 6-iron and then stick it back in the bag and move on to the next shot. But again,
that is dealing with the uncomfortability.
Yeah, that is the game. So sort of one more thing on the golf side, which I thought was interesting, because it wasn't really about golf, I don't think, but you use it to play better. And this is the idea of fighting against your wiring, especially in tournament play, where you wrote that your tendency is to sort of focus inward, and you are fighting against your wiring to almost be an extrovert in those scenarios to sort of maintain balance. So I'm curious, what are we supposed to gather from that? How do you do that, and why is that useful in golf?
Well, I think, again, it goes back to the self-awareness piece of just recognizing how you're wired and when it's a good time to lock into some of that, and when it's a good time to move in a different direction of that. So I think that, for me, I know that I'm hyper competitive. So one thing that's helpful is if I try and shift into a heart posture of gratitude and look around and take it in that I get to play golf today. My body is working well enough that I can swing. That's a blessing, because there's days where I wake up, and I had the privilege of playing East Lake last year, and I woke up and it felt like I had a 45, caliber bullet lodged in my back and I could barely move. And, so trying to shift into that heart posture of gratitude, knowing that I am a competitive freak. So I don't have to worry about that. I need to focus on surrender the outcome, because my wiring is pulling me hardcore towards compete. You need to take some deep breaths and surrender the outcome. If you're not a super competitive person, you need to be pulling yourself towards compete, and creating environment, situations, and a mindset that pushes you in that direction. But it's understanding your wiring and, how you like to operate, and then just trying to account for that in everything that you do. And again, if you're hyper competitive, you have a greater likelihood of ruining relationships or tarnishing relationships, because you allow your competitiveness to be the driving force instead of, it's like, well, I'm just competing. Well, sure, but again, what's going to matter on your deathbed? What's and to some people, if your priorities are purely winning, okay, like I don't try and tell people what their priorities should be. I may have a conversation with them in the right context of, there are times whenever we should think about, if I have somebody that's invited me into that space, okay, is this the most beneficial and constructive way of operating? But really, I ask people, what are your priorities? And they tell me. Now, I may show them their schedule and say that doesn't actually look like in real life what your priorities are. But I don't tell people what the most beneficial and constructive thing is. I ask them, hey, is this the most beneficial and constructive thing that you can be doing? But if it is, if you know that that's your wiring in one way or another, then usually you need to be uncomfortable in the other direction, because it's just like on, I remember taking a golf tech lesson back in the day, and they would show me my swing, then they'd show me, a pro's swing and say, okay, I want you to do this. And I would feel like I had done that thing. And then I would look at the video and it would look the exact same as the first one. And so closing that gap between feel and real. So what I work with clients is, you need to feel so uncomfortable in the other direction, or else it's not doing anything like you think it's actually doing. So if you're a grinder, you need to feel so uncomfortable in terms of social and relationships and over here. And if you're social and relationships and fun, you need to feel so uncomfortable in terms of grinding. And we're really probably only moving the needle a tiny little bit.
Right. That's the key, is that it's just sort of pulling you back to a center.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff. I'll leave you with this, but you had a friend, you've talked about, and a lot of this conversation is about doing a hard shit. And you had a friend ask you, what hard shit are you doing now? Which then I guess spark something in you to go to Norway and stay in cold water for a long time. So I will ask you the same question. What hard shit you've done golf, you've done a lot of books. Golf's never over, but what are you doing now, and what do you hope to do in the future?
The hardest thing that I've done in the last 7 years was cutting 99% of work and focusing on my personal life. So when Chopwood went viral, I knew that I would probably never need to work again based off the fact that it's self-published, and I know that I'm going to sell 100 copies a day probably for the rest of my life. And it's not that I have a lot of money in my bank account, it's just that I know I'm going to sell books every single day. And so the question I've always asked myself since my dad got diagnosed with terminal cancer is, are you living in such a way that you could get diagnosed with terminal cancer and not change a thing about how you're living? And there was a point 7-ish years ago where I was out on the road and I asked myself that question, and it was no longer speaking and consulting and coaching. and I made a decision. I called my business partner at the time, Lucas Jaden, who I wrote When in the Dark with, and I said, I'm going to cut 99% of work. You're going to run the brand. I'll mentor you and I'll coach you, but I'm going to take a huge step back. And right now, that's what putting first things first looks like for me. It was fascinating because I've dealt with suicidal ideation my whole life. I've dealt with mental health my whole life, since losing my brother and people to prison and lots of other crazy stuff. It was never as bad as after I achieved all the quote unquote success, and after I knew that I no longer needed to climb mountains. And so the hardest thing for me to do, like I said, I'm a grinder, I'm a workhorse. Work doesn't scare me. You put a mountain in front of me and it's like, oh, let's go. What was really, really hard was sitting still and dealing with the demons that came from not climbing mountains anymore and actually having to sit still and deal with my shit. And so everybody told me that I was crazy when I did that. People were like, well, what happens if book sales dry up? Well, what if it made people so uncomfortable, almost more uncomfortable than anything I've ever done in my life. They just could not understand. They thought it was the most foolish, short-sighted thing that I had done. And I was like, look, maybe it is. I can always go back to work. And I'm not scared of losing everything because I've slept on Skid Row. I've lived in the closet of a gym. I've lived in a homeless shelter. I know what those things are like. All the stuff that most people are scared to death of, I know that life. Doesn't necessarily mean I want to go back to it, but I'm also not afraid of it. And so that the hard shit is, for me, is my personal life. It's really focusing on all that stuff that, is easy to cover up when you're just climbing and achieving, and my mental health and things surrounding that. And so, I really said I cared about local community. I said that I wanted to, have a significant other, but the decisions I was making in terms of traveling and speaking weren't really conducive for building local community or having a relationship that points towards, a long-term partner marriage. And so that was the hardest thing that I've done lately. But, on a day-to-day basis, just being aware of like, what scares me? Okay, I should probably move towards that. What am I afraid of? I should probably move towards that. What is hard? I should move towards that. And, golf was definitely one of those things. I never set out to win the club championship. I never set out to achieve anything in golf. That all happened kind of accidentally. It really was just the pursuit of mastery. And man, I want to build a really good golf swing. I want to try and see how good I could get at golf. And that's also why I'm not as good now, because that pursuit, what it takes on a day-to-day basis, is a lot. And especially if you didn't grow up as a kid and you don't have that foundation that you can lean back on. Any given day, can I go out and shoot even par? Sure. But I can also go out and shoot 82. And that consistency is a lot harder to have if you're not, chopping wood, carrying water every single day when it comes to golf. But yeah, I think that's been, a lot of the hard stuff, whether it's the cold water therapy and, that I'm glad you reminded me of that story, because I do remember sitting in Miami and a girl that was like a little sister that played on Indiana State, where my first golf coach coached out of. And she said, like, what hard shit are you doing? And Jim Murphy had invited me to Norway to do the Intermountain expeditions. And I told him, no, I don't want to do that. Like, I have zero desire. I'm not doing it. I told him no like 5 times. And he just kept being like, yeah, well, there's a spot for you. You're going to come. And I'm like, Jim, you're crazy. I'm not going. But then when she said that to me, I was like, this is what I'm afraid of. This is what I need to run towards. And so I think it shifts often for me, but I just try and make sure that I'm running towards hard stuff. And there's going to be seasons where I do more of that than others, but I just know that, especially when I get out of kilter, that I probably need to start running towards what scares me. I need to start running towards hard stuff. I'm probably not doing enough hard stuff.
Yeah. And it's nice to know that the hard stuff is not always like these big, obvious, sexy mountains to climb. It's it's in the stillness too.
Yep.
Yeah, in the small stuff.
Sometimes sitting still is one of the toughest things. One exercise I had one of my clients do 2 years ago, I started speaking a little bit again. I started taking on a few clients again. And one of my coaching clients, one of the hardest things, it took him a year to actually do it, was go to a cabin in the woods with nothing but water and a book and a journal. Completely cut off from technology and just sit and be still.
No Netflix?
Nothing.
Cold guy. Yeah.
And
it's great.
The way that develops, if you deal with nervous energy, it's one of the best exercises. And I don't have a ton of nervous energy, but I just know that sitting still and not climbing mountains. I mean, I was talking with Seth Madison, who I wrote The Future of Leadership with yesterday, and I think I published 9 books in a 3-year period or something like that. Or Chop Wood and Dear Future Mrs. President came late. So it was 7 books in like a maybe 2.5 year, 3-year period. It was insane. But that was easy. Sitting still, cutting work, and not getting, some of the dopamine hits that, dude, going on stage and speaking, the dopamine hits that you get out of that, that's why, Justin Bieber put out a thing about that, of like how that changed his brain from, performing on stages for so long. And like, my mom had me in preaching competitions when I was 6 and 7 years old. Like that, I thrive in that environment. Take that away, and all of a sudden it's like, who are you if everything that you do is taken away from you? And really dealing with a lot of the stuff that I write about to other people, really making sure that I'm taking that hard look in the mirror and having to deal with the hard stuff for myself.
Yes. As the great philosopher Jay-Z once said, you can't run from the pain, you have to run to it. So thank you for, inspiring us all to run to it.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and I'm excited to play some golf now.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joshua.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.